Hey, it's Jeremy from Jeremy.net. I'm a comic book artist, writer, self-publisher. I share my creative process here with you on the internet. If you'd like to support this channel, get additional bonus videos, see behind-the-scenes artwork before anyone else, you can go to patreon.com/GERIMI. Sign up for my Patreon account. If you'd like to see what I'm up to throughout the month, catch the best of my social media posts collected all in one place, you can sign up for my newsletter at news.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my books, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. That'll forward you to my Amazon author page. So, we're doing something a little bit different this week. I was having some trouble with live streaming, so I'm just going to record this video and upload it. And the focus for today is going to be gesture drawing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do some gesture drawings from Michelangelo's Last Judgment. And I often cite this as a piece to study from for figure drawing works, because this is a painting that's in the Vatican. And it's in the Sistine Chapel. This one large painting takes up the entire wall, one side of one wall. This is a massive painting. In a very large room. It's not like it's a small chapel either. It's like the whole room is like a football field. And so if you just put up like a wall at one end of a room that big, that's how big this painting is. It's giant. Anyway, I mean, the figures in here, I think, are larger than life size, if that gives you a sense of how big the painting is. And within this, there's countless figures throughout it. So I often have said that this painting is a great study to look at for just a variety of figure drawing poses and figure gestures, because it just has such a variety of figures acting, posing, involved with different different little tableaus. So what I'm going to do is I am going to try to mimic a little bit of what I do when I'm in figure drawing class. So when I'm doing just gestures, usually they might be 1 or 2 minute poses, and I'm going to keep them down to 90 seconds because I may draw because I'm going to be talking through this while I'm doing it. But I'm going to go through and I'm going to do, I don't know, 5 to 8, I guess maybe 8 gestures. And then I'm going to come back to each of them and I'm going to go spend 5 minutes flushing them out and turning them into basic volumes. So the idea of this is, first you can see me how I draw when I'm just focusing on gesture. Then you can see what I do when I'm trying to transform those gestures into volumes. So these are going to be a lot larger than I would do normally because I'm going to come back and draw into them. Normally if I were just doing gestures, I'd probably do maybe like, I don't know, a 3 to 4 inch tall drawing, because I actually draw in size depending on how much time I have for the drawing. So let's get started here. And I think I'm going to start with just the painting that's on the cover. And just make a quick adjustment. And here on my timer. And let's start. So I'm going to start with the cover because it's a pretty good pose. So what I'm really looking for, I usually start any drawing. This is not true to all gesture drawings. This is just a personal thing I do. I like to make a very light line marking what's going to be the top and the bottom of the figure. And then from there, what is true of most people is you're looking for the longest lines. And what I'm trying to do is just capture what is the through line for this figure. So the longest line for me I'd see is this S curve of the arm to the shoulder and then cutting in from the shoulder to the spine. So going up the arm, then around the back. Then I go and just try to flesh out what are the longest points. What are the limbs doing and what is the torso doing? So this is more about communicating what's happening with the figure. So from the spine, I'm going to draw a line down from here down to the knee. And then moving across here, I can see that the other hand, or really his wrist, but the hand is kind of parallel with the chin, which is kind of parallel to where the shoulder meets. So if I were to go over here across from the chin, across from the shoulder, let's say down here, let's put his other hand, the elbow coming up this side. See, that's already the end of the 90 seconds. So let me turn that off. So what I would want to get in here is his spine. Here is his head. Here is his shoulder, arm with the hand, other shoulder, elbow, other hand, and you can't really see his knee from the back. I do also want to make an indication for where the pelvis is, because his knee isn't just coming out of nowhere and it kind of leaves it floating. So the idea here for me in a gesture drawing is blocking in what are the major, where are the joints, where are the landmarks. So like, what are the limbs doing? What is the upper arm and lower arm doing? Sometimes you can look at the arm as a whole. Sometimes you can look at the arm as in upper arm, joint, lower arm, when there's a significant direction change. And then kind of deciding, okay, there's foreshortening in the upper torso, foreshortening in the pelvis, defining that, and the knee. So that, to me, is just a simple gesture drawing. I'm already starting to go into more detail than I really would want to just for like a minute's time. So let's randomly flip through here, see some other figures we can find that we can draw from. Let's see. It's a matter of finding one that's a mostly a full figure, and I want to get one that's on the right side of the page so it's not cut off so you guys can see it while I'm drawing it. Let's see. This one might be interesting. So this one, the one I want to do is on the left side of the page. Let me scoot this over. And I'll just put my drawing pad on top of the book here. I'm going to tag this so I can come back to it. So this one, again, let's start another timer. Let's say that this is the figure here. We've got the spine bent over. The arm is going off of the screen. Out of the panel. We'll just let that go out like that. With the hips, it looks like it's tilted so that his left hip's a little bit down, but not dramatically. Right's a little bit up. Let's go with the longer leg. Start drawing the short one, but let's go down, and then this is coming towards us. It appears to be coming out and then straight down, but what's actually happening in space is that there's foreshortening, and then his foot is on top of there. His other foot, if you can look at that, his other foot is as high up as his knee. So a lot of times those are kind of the landmarks I'm looking for in terms of working out the proportions. It's just saying, what is this parallel to? What is it above? What is it below? So if you can look for it, really, what I try to do in the gesture is I'm already kind of working on proportion. And in that sense, what I'm saying is I'm looking at the joints and saying, what is one joint in relationship to the other? What is the foot's relationship to the other foot? And if instead of the foot, it's the knee, that's done. All right. Instead of the foot, it's the knee in this case. So instead of just saying, well, I'm still important to understand what the relationship between this foot and that foot is. But specifically in here, what it's parallel to is the knee. So I may move from what's the relationship of one to the other. I'm just going to lightly mark in the head, which is as far out as his shoulder in this case. So the head is sort of peeking out here. His shoulder is the tallest, the highest part in this figure. Hang on. All right. I might have to make a little adjustment here in this recording because I want to make sure it doesn't cut off as I'm filming. There we go. So that'd be the gesture for that one. Let's see what else we have here. Oh, well, this just continues the image. You can see now the rest of the figure is that it goes out. You can see his elbow, and it comes down. That makes sense. Just has the continuation of the whole thing here. But let's see what else we can see in terms of full figures. Here's another one that is interesting because it's, I think, very challenging. But it'll be odd because I'm going to be moving to the next side of the page. Let's maybe see if we can find one that's on this side. A lot of foreshortening here. This is a hard one to do a gesture for, but never let it be said that I'm not going to dive in and do some hard poses. So let's slide this under here. Start the timer. So on this one, it's really all about this long horizontal, or kind of this long diagonal, because the whole body is making a nice sweep. So that is the gesture of the entire figure. Now from here, if this is the hand, I kind of go back, and because there's so much foreshortening, this is a lot of just estimating on my part. It's sort of estimating, well, here is kind of a line between the two shoulders, so sort of where the upper body is. Then not too far behind it, because of the foreshortening, is the pelvis. Then one leg going out and back in some strong foreshortening, and the foot coming out. The other knee kind of tucks behind, and then that leg seems to disappear behind the figure. So I'll just sort of gesture that in. Then this other arm going out. The line itself is like a full diagonal, and you can see at the hand ends about parallel to the foot, just in the foreground of it. But what's happening in space is that while you see a line that gesturally just goes at an angle like that, what you're really seeing is arm going back in space and then coming forward in space. And even though I'm not working out the volumes yet, I try to be aware of this in the gesture phase, because these are going to be the forms, the volumes I want to build on. So I really didn't get very far in that one, but let me just circle in the head here, and then maybe try and give it a little bit of unity by throwing in a quick line down the center of the figure, a center line. So, yeah, these gestures, really what I'm going for is just a stick figure that captures the pose, that captures what the figure is doing. Am I drawing on the back of a page? Yes, I just realized that. I'm drawing on the back of a page. I'll have to flip this over and keep going the other way when after I finish this sheet of drawings. This is a section called The Resurrection of the Dead. I really actually need to read this book at some point so I can take in all of the symbolism that's rife with this book. So what it does here is it gives you a large image of a full section, and then it goes through several pages and talks about what the symbolism, what's supposed to be happening in each of these sections. So let's see here. This is a little too big. I really kind of want to keep this instead just on one sheet. Like this pose. This will work. So get a sip of water. My mouth is a little dry, and I apologize if I'm smacking. I'm aware I smack my mouth a bit when I talk. I keep trying to fight it. My mouth dries out when I live stream because I'm doing way more talking than I usually do in daily life. So, again, the figure is going to be this tall, but in this case, instead of this being where the character's feet are, this is basically where the crotch is, because just below that his leg disappears below ground. He's crawling out of a pit. So I can curve this line a little bit more. This isn't really the spine. This is more of me drawing this outer line. That's what I'm doing. So I'm sort of drawing an imaginary line of what is the main volume of that side of his body doing. Coming over to the other side, dropping a line down for the arm, then going back and doing the other arm. So I'm kind of trying to frame the outer limits of this figure. And then within that frame, his foot is a little bit further back than his hand. So here's the hand, the foot's just a little bit further back. Some strong foreshortening as this foot comes in, the knee coming right across the front of his torso, and then going back. So I kind of want to put a line in here indicating that this is curving away from me, and then have the foot come forward. Maybe put a circular form in there to represent the kneecap. So super loose, super blobby. Now his head is turning away strongly. So I'm going to kind of rough in his head here. That's the timer. Now, his shoulder ends right here, so I'm kind of trying to be conscientious of not putting his head too far out, and I think I drew it too far out in that first one. So let's pull his head back a little bit. And right now I'm drawing like his facial plane. So let's fill that out and give it a little bit of elliptical volume there. Now, the last line I'm going to put in here is just the rounding of his shoulder, because his head is right there, but if you look at his shoulders, the shoulders themselves are from here to here, but the trapezius muscles on top of his shoulders, they basically form like an arch going from shoulder to shoulder behind his head. So I'm just going to lightly mark that in. And that's my gesture for this guy. The one other thing, I'm taking a little bit more time here, is I kind of want to indicate the shift between his arm and then the break where his wrist turns out to the side and fans out. Because I feel like that's a significant... anytime a limb is changing direction at a joint, that's something you want to try and get down in your gestures. This is already going into volume, so this is more detailed than I really want. So I'm going to stop that there. Let's see here. What do we want to do next? Let's see, another large figure. This guy pulling this person's hair. I think this is a demon. He's ripping this person's hair down. Let's try this. So start. Down. Oddly enough, this pose is super dynamic, and this gesture feels like it's one of the easiest ones I've done yet. I really just want to try and drop these forms back. Now it's just a matter of, because I've already got the head, the arms, the torso, and this other leg. You can't really see it, but it seems like it's going to be kind of arching out behind that figure, like arching out behind the other leg that's taking up most of the space. So now it's just me trying to adjust the volumes. So the knee is here. Make sure I get in that the pelvis is right there. The torso runs along here. In relation to that, the overall shoulder is a little bit higher than the where the pelvis is. The elbow is pretty close to the thigh. If you look, here's the thigh, here's the elbow, pretty close together. The wrist being almost parallel with the knee, and that hand that's doing the pulling up there. And that other arm is above. You can see the shoulder and his torso twisting up kind of on the other side. All right, yeah, see, I already started getting into a lot of volume there. Let's see. All right. I think that, honestly, I was going to do a bunch, but I think that these 5 drawings are going to be sufficient for showing me building each one into volumes. So let's go back. I'll mark this page so I can come back to it. Make sure I have the other ones that I mark this page as well. All right. All right, so let's go back to the cover of the book. Start with this, and now I'm going to set this timer at 5 minutes. But really at this point, if I were really in a figure drawing class, it would have been a 5-minute pose, and I would already only have 4 minutes left. So I'm just, giving myself a little extra time here so I can talk through what I'm doing as I do it. So I've got this gesture laid in. Now, for me, the first thing I want to do is create a sense of volume about the torso. At this angle, the torso, it's like a larger rounded shape. Almost like a large, flat, round stone. And what it's doing in space, I'm just putting a little cross axis here, just so I can kind of get a better sense of it. But really, the cross axis would almost be like kind of the way the ribs are curving around this figure. At this point, the idea is solidifying the landmarks. So the spine, it runs down the center of the form, but because we're seeing more of this side, that spine is going to be running down here and disappearing before you can really see. Like, you can kind of see the cleft of the gluteus, but you're not really seeing his full backside because it's turned away from you. And then coming down this side, I want to really get in here and there's layers of overlap, because there's the overlap between, here's the upper torso right here, which this line, this side of the torso kind of defines. And then there's the lower torso, but there's also the overlap of the knee starting to come forward. And then there's the fact that the gluteus, well, there's also sort of the love handles. Why is my brain flaking on them? It's not the latissimus. It drives me nuts that I can't remember because it's on the tip of my tongue. As soon as I look at a book, I'm going to go like, duh, stupid. But I have to grab an art book and look. Grabbing Walt reads the figure. There's this section on the torso. The external obliques. That is what I was looking for. Oh. You would like to think after this many years of studying the human figure, I would have all these muscles memorized. And I do, actually. I mean, I know that, but it's just one of those brain fart days where it's not coming together. Now, so you've got the pelvis itself, the external obliques, which are kind of the transitional form between the upper body and lower body. Then let's put the shoulders in here. There's a lot of foreshortening in here. Shoulders. Now, I'm worried about getting the basic volumes, but Michelangelo is so sculpture in his drawing that even in drawing the basic volumes, he really gives you a sense of the anatomy as well. So the basic volume would just be a cylinder coming forward this way, another cylinder that's still coming forward but curving, inward, and then the hand for this. It's really just me trying to define because it's also grasping a wrist, so I'm just sort of kind of like roughing in the thumb, that palm, the finger. I'm spending more time on this than I really have for doing a 5-minute pose. This is the first one. It's okay. I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to draw a little bit more just so I can show you what I go for in a 5-minute pose. And then for the rest of these, I'll try to just draw. Yeah, see, I knew the end of the timer was coming. But I still feel like I've barely gotten half of the figure in. Now, the head is in front of the very beginning of the shoulder, the attachment of the shoulder. So I'm going to throw this shoulder. And also, the center line. Right here, I've got kind of a head curving down this way, but that's actually incorrect. These are the kind of things that you catch when you're building your volumes. Is, the axis of the head running at an angle kind of parallel to the arm. So that his chin is down here, top of his head is up here. The eyebrow, or the brow line, dropping down, going around that axis. Now the far arm, his left, my right, rounding in that shoulder. Now there's a lot of anatomical detail in terms of, the triceps in the back, the bones of the elbow, I believe it's the brachialis muscles that are on the inside. Well, there's also seeing the bicep being smushed together, so you're seeing it from the front, even though the bicep is on the other side of this. You know, like here's the tricep, the bicep, you know, is underneath it, but you're seeing it smush. You're seeing the side of it sticking out here. But really, what I want to get is this cylinder. To me, this is the basic volume, is this cylinder. And then having the forearm come down. I'm making a little block here to represent the bones of the wrist, the way that this comes up, over, and then down, framing the actual hand. This little lump here being the end of the ulna. There's a little nub in your arm. That is the end, the other end of the bone that makes up your elbow. Your elbow, that nub, the ulna. You can see the mass of the forearm running along the side here. And then the wrist itself changing direction. So the forearm is coming this way. It hits this wrist. The wrist not only shifts to come towards us, but it's also turned slightly. So it's not just coming up at the end, but it's coming up and turned. Let me hold my wrist. It's coming up and out. So it's bending. And those changes in direction are what the gesture is all about. And it's hard to capture these things because, again, like I said, this is me moving on beyond gesture and working out the volume. If you can get things like those turns in the stick figure phase, you should. Sometimes you don't have enough time, but then when you come back in and you're now working out the volumes, that's the time when you definitely are trying to get these characteristics. So that's about a 5-minute pose. And a lot of times when I'm in a figure drawing class and I'm drawing straight through gesture to volumes, this is about how much I get in 5 minutes. Maybe if I'm on a roll and I really get everything down, I'll get the, blocking in the nose, the eyes, the hairline, mouth. When I'm doing full figure, I spend a lot less time working on the face because you can spend all of your time working on the skull because that's, the human face is so detailed. That's why there's portrait painting. I could just make a whole drawing of just the head in the time that I'm spending on the whole figure. If I have more time, then I work in things like the actual volumes of the extensor muscles on the forearm, the flexors. No, actually, see, I got it backwards because the extensor, the flexors pull in, so they're over here. They flex the forearm. The extensors make it extend back out. See, these muscles out here extend, flex, extend, flex. These are things I have to keep reminding myself as I'm drawing, try and remember them to properly define these things. All right, so let's move on to this challenging fellow here. All right, 5-minute pose started. So, again, blocking in what's happening with the torso. And the main, most interesting thing is the way that you're seeing the underside of the torso here. Or at least you're seeing kind of the side, like his flank and his pec muscles curving out from the sides. You almost could split this into, here's the pelvis, again, the external obliques, but then in the middle there's the spine, but there's almost like a donut wrapping around the middle, that space between the rib cage, which is bone, and the pelvis, that is bone. So you can almost kind of conceptually throw that volume in there. Let's get the rounding of the gluteus. Let's curve that spine up. It goes up and away from us, dipping back down into where the neck is. So let's go up. To a certain degree, I don't feel like I'm being 100% true to Michelangelo, because I'm kind of putting lines in here. Like, for instance, I'm using the shadow that's running along here. Using this shadow to act as a definer between the back and the side. Which, I mean, I think that that's what he's trying to communicate, but I'm not necessarily describing it on the page as eloquently as Michelangelo. I don't know why that should come as a surprise to anyone. I was never a huge Michelangelo fan until I started taking figure drawing classes, and Carl Ganas really turned me on to how much Michelangelo describes volume in his drawing. And since then, I've really, spent a lot of time looking at his drawings. This particular book, I mean, that was the reason why I got this book, because I felt like this book almost is Michelangelo's master class in drawing the figure. And when I say this book, this is a book of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, which, although if you know anything about his life, he really didn't want to work on the project and was forced on it by the Pope. But it is, I think, one of his major everything he worked on was a major statement about the human figure. But the Sistine Chapel, with its endless variety of figures and poses and volumetric painting, is almost like it's the be-all, end-all of his statement on the human figure and what can be expressed by it. I don't know, he might not feel that way since he didn't want to really work on it. But my cats disagree. They really feel that Michelangelo's David is the be-all, end-all. But, I like the variety of all the poses. I'm doing figure studies, sweetheart. Shush. Alright. I'm getting a little bit too wrapped up in drawing muscle as opposed to getting basic volume. So let me try and mentally streamline this a little bit. When I say basic volumes, what I mean is sort of like this leg, that's the end of that timer. This leg that I'm drawing right here, or rather the lower leg, if you were to make this like in a 3D model out of primitives, you could have, let me draw this over here to the side, a egg-like shape. Again, first let me get the axis, the direction the muscle's going. And that's a little much. You've got this egg-like shape that's almost a sphere because you're really looking at close to the top of the egg. Then you've got a cylinder coming out of it, below the calf. I'm drawing these as though I'm drawing through like clear plastic or glass objects, with the foot attached to the end, which is a complicated thing because it's a wedge, but it's a wedge that has a wide variety of subforms that sort of move in and out of each other gradually, as opposed to, oh, this is one big directional change. It's just got a lot of transitional forms in it. So let me quickly here just toss in this shoulder and this head, at least so this feels like I tried to finish it. And again, in my mind, I can see comparisons between sort of the shoulder here and sort of the rounding of the glutes and the forearm and the calf. Because you can look at the upper arm, you can look at the arms and the legs as parallels in terms of the joints. You know, the elbow is a hinge joint, the knee is a hinge joint, the hip is a ball and socket, the shoulder is a ball and socket. So if you can really understand one, you can understand the other. And I didn't really... The head is complicated to explain the volumes in this drawing here because you're looking at the underside, an extreme foreshortened underside figure. And I think in order to properly explain what's going on in there, I would almost have to do a full detailed drawing of just that. So let's move on to another one. All right. So this challenging pose, flying figure. Let's get into position here. Scoot it out a little bit so I got a little room to draw. So for these next couple of drawings, I am gonna try and do less talking and just draw here. I realized part of the thing about simplifying Michelangelo's figures is that it's challenging in the sense that Michelangelo actually adds so much of his volume description in his muscles that you have to know your volumes well enough that you can see the basic forms that he's describing with complicated forms. Because otherwise you might just look at this and just see a big mass of muscles instead of being able to decipher, oh, how all of these things make up to this one simple cylinder heading this direction and then changing to this other direction. It's not easy. I feel like I'm working my ass off here. Need an eraser here. This part's just not working. I gotta get that transition from going away from the viewer to towards the figure, and this very subtle foreshortening. I don't think I really accomplished what I wanted here, because what I wanted is to get all of the foreshortening that's going on here. Foreshortening can be one of the most difficult things to convey in a drawing. Particularly when you've got these muscles overlapping and wrapping around. Well, I mean, that's kind of the definition of what foreshortening is. And if I were to just go in here and just block in a conceptual line to just say, hey, it's a rounded form and it's squaring off over here at the wrist, and then the hand, the palm coming up, and I drew this too close to the top of the page because I really should have enough room to sort of get in there with the detail of the knuckles and having these fingers curling over this rod. That the figure is holding. This rod that's going out this way, through the fingers, across the foot. Yeah, I didn't get to the forearm, but that would be, I think, getting compressed. I don't think I left enough room to properly draw the arm and the forearm on this one anyway. So that's just what I got down in 5 minutes. A lot of times I'm drawing a pose in 5 minutes, and I may spend all my time just working the torso, and the limbs may not get any more finished than the little simple stick figure gestures that I worked out in the beginning. So let's go with this guy now. Lots of foreshortening with Michelangelo. Not playing here. So what I'm trying to do here with a lot of these is define what are the simple planes that are happening. And now that I get a better look at this, I can see that there is more, the linea alba, that line, that division between the muscles that runs down the figure, runs directly behind the knee. So I kind of want to pull this more this way and pull his knee over a little bit more. But let me see, the challenge here is I want to very clearly define what's behind the knee, even though I'm going to be covering it up. Because I think that's the problem a lot of times when you have foreshortening, you have forms that are overlapping, is you kind of figure, well, why am I going to draw all this? It's going to be covered up by something in front of it anyway. But if you don't at least really get down the basic structure of those things, they're going to look less like they are on top of each other and more like they're separate objects floating in space and not properly related to each other. And you want them to relate to each other, because it's not a floating torso and a floating knee. It's all part of one figure. And Michelangelo can convey that, and my goal is to learn how to convey what he's conveying. It's a, you know, it's a challenge, but it's a fun challenge. I enjoy kind of wrestling with the figure in this way, because I'm never going to get bored. There's never a point where it's like, oh, I've mastered it. The figure, there's always stuff about that's difficult to draw. Now, see, right now I have to stop myself, because now I'm just putting in lines for no real reason. I'm implying the deltoid up there, but I'm not properly describing it. Implying it is just putting lines where that object is. That's just saying, oh, that's up there, I'm just going to put a line up there. That line's heading in that direction, I'm going to put it in that general direction. But it's not describing what it's wrapping around. The same way that the gesture describes what the figure is doing in space, the volumes, when you're drawing forms, the forms are describing what the actual parts of the figure are doing in space. The gesture and the figure go hand in hand. And so that relates back to that thing about implying versus describing. You want to say, this is not just, oh, there's a form here. You really want to, if that just reads like, oh, it's a line here, that's where the shoulder ends, that's not as good as describing what is the top of that surface, what is the side of that surface, what is it attaching to, what is it wrapping around. Like me taking the time to draw this line in here, it implies that the trapezoid, above the deltoids, this is the deltoids, these are the trapezoids, that's going up and around the neck. So it's coming off of the collarbone, really off of both the collarbone and the shoulder blades. More the shoulder blades, because it's, part of the shoulder and the back as opposed to the shoulder and the front. But at the end, it comes up and attaches to both. It's where the collarbone and the shoulder blades unite. Describing that's going in and then back up behind the neck. Describing that the neck, that when it comes down here under the jawline, that it's not just a line, that what happens is there is a plane, which is the underside of the jaw, and you're seeing it at a shallow angle. So it's not that there's shadow there for shadow's sake. Shadow, you have to think about, what is that shadow describing? This is the essence of getting down to form. All right, that timer went way too fast, and this is what I was talking about. Look, I spent all that time, and I really didn't get that much of the figure in. I basically just very lightly blocked in the rib cage. I hardly got into all of this detail that's going on in the pelvis, the feeling that the hip is both dropping down and that the leg is going out to the side. There's a stretch here. For those of you that study animation, one of the things you do when you're first starting out is squash and stretch, where you're drawing like a bouncing ball and you do a simple animation of that, or you do a potato sack that's kind of falling or walking. Anatomy squashes and stretches. In fact, that's constantly what's happening. Muscles contracting and relaxing is squash and stretch. In fact, you should say, as opposed to contracting and relaxing, you should say contracting and stretching, because that, I don't think of the contraction as a squash, even though that's what it is. It's the muscle pulling in, but the stretching, the relaxing, really often is it getting stretched out as it's getting pulled. I'm going into too much muscular detail here, but that's because this is very juicy in terms of there's so much detail. Realistically, I should be sticking with what I told you I was going to stick with, which is simple forms. Like, this foot has a lot of detail to it, but really it's a wedge with a rounded top that ends in a flatter wedge, being the toes at the end. And I drew it too far out. This whole knee here, I got caught up in how much of a bend there is, but if you look at where the end of the knee is on this side and you drop a line straight down, like, it gives you the center of the foot. Whereas if you drop a line straight down here, my foot's all the way out to the side. This is some proportion stuff. What I really need to do is bring that foot in to here. So I'm going over the time limit that I was setting, but that's because I feel like this is worth clarifying. And going back to those simple forms, if I just put it in a simple spherical form for the knee, and then just a cylinder that has a rounder end near the top, that's the basic form of the lower leg. And then you can kind of see around the back the upper thigh resting on top of it. It's a much larger, the muscles of the upper leg are larger than the lower leg, but they're also sitting on top of it, so you can't really see a whole lot of it. And then for this arm, it's coming forward in space, so I can just very simply, I do want to acknowledge the elbow, so I may separate this. Well, actually, you know what? First things first, just a simple two-dimensional form. Wider at the shoulder, narrower at the wrist. Now, yes, it gets narrower at the forearm. It gets wider at the forearm again. And then you can kind of round out the shoulder here, but you want to make it feel, round, three-dimensional. But yeah, it's a cylinder that's just moving forward. This is the relationship between the anatomy and the volumes. The volumes are that cylinder moving forward, but the anatomy is how you've got this rounded shoulder coming over that. You've got these forearms coming over. Then you still terminate at that wrist, that boxy shape. And again, the wrist turning. So here's when I say a wedge, what I mean is a triangle that's extruded. I don't know if you know what extruded is, but okay. Just going into simple to clarify. So this is the flat shape, a triangle. Now, to extrude that triangle means to take it and stretch it out into 3 dimensions. So you go from that to see, now you've got a form. This is the side. That's the top. That's a wedge. The wrist is a wedge. The foot is a very rounded, very complicated wedge. A wedge with a lot of other stuff going on, but it's a wedge. I say the wrist, I mean really kind of the palm is a wedge, but it's also a wedge that if you spread your fingers out, it's narrower at the tall part and then it's wider at the bottom part. But then it's also a wedge that can become a cup, it become a rounded ball. It transforms. The hand is very difficult, it's very complicated. And the challenge is how to simplify these complications. It's not, oh, it's complicated, so I'm going to make a complicated drawing. It's how to figure out what are the elements I need to put in to make it read as a hand, for people to understand what the hand's doing. It's not simplification, it's poetry. Poetry is a very specific, instead of taking all of the emotion and heartbreak that might be in a long literary novel and narrowing it down to maybe 14 stanzas that express everything that's an idea that might be in like a Tolstoy novel. You can express that in one poem. I mean, and then there's also epic poems that have really long stories, but the idea that with the figure, what you're trying to do is express all of that complexity that is the human form, but expressing it simply, but with poetry. Because if you're going to have all of the detail, if you're going to forego poetry and just go for accuracy and just try to capture everything that's in a figure, you might as well be a photographer. Photography is an art, but even photographers choose and select, emphasize, and play down, to emphasize and de-emphasize different parts of the figure. So even with that, there's artistic choices. I mean, there's a lot of artistic choices. It's a whole different field. I haven't studied it nearly enough to speak on it eloquently, but I definitely don't dismiss it as, oh, you're just... My point being with drawing is that if you're simply making a point of just getting down everything that's on the figure, that's more of a... It takes a lot of skill to do. But in my mind, it feels like it's a more mechanical process than poetic process. Now, somebody who can capture something that's photorealistic and still capture that beauty and poetry... That is very, very, very difficult. It's also something that I don't want to do. Not because I don't think that it is a quality, a skill that's worth attaining, but it's not where my personal interests in terms of expressing art lie. So on this guy, yes, those are personal choices, not a judgment on photorealism at large. Like the most prominent form to me really seems like this whole thigh here, even though the longest thing we're getting a look at is this arm. So I'm gonna basically try and jump back and forth between the two of those forms and blocking them in. So this again, it's in between a cylinder and a large egg-shaped form, and then wraps into the spherical form of the pelvis. Now at the same time, there's again the external obliques, that donut that kind of separates, that muscular donut that connects the pelvis with the rib cage, then rounding up the rib cage, and the fact that there's a twisting here. So you're looking at more of the profile here, but it twists up so that you see more and more of his upper body and pecs as you get closer to his head, because that's what he's doing. He's leaning into that. And this line I'm going to pull out there because that's a form that's going behind that thigh. And a lot of times, when I'm drawing figures, I will save the head for last, which is why a lot of times when I'm doing figure drawings from a live model in a class, sometimes I don't get around to drawing the heads at all. But the reason for that is because I can't remember what instructor taught me this, but I learned this in some figure drawing class I took in the past. I can't say for sure if it was Carl Ganas or not. He may have said it, but I've heard more than one instructor say this. The idea that if you draw the head first and you get a head that you like, you will sit there and spend forever trying to fix the body when the body just isn't working. Because sometimes you just get that line for the head just right. But if you're doing the whole figure, then it's not just about the head. It's not a portrait. So it's better. Let me put it this way: you're going to mess up on the head probably more than you will the rest of the figure. So it's better to go ahead and work out the figure. That way you've got that down. And then you could spend all of your time doing your drawing and redrawing with the head anyway, because that's the part that you're like, that's the part that you're probably really going to sweat over. So it's almost like get the figure down, because otherwise what you'll end up doing is you'll let crappy body drawing go because you're like, well, I really got that head and I like that head. So if you save the head for last, you're like, all right, at least you'll have an elegant figure. And if you decide you want to go back and work on that head later because you didn't get it, it's fine. But you're not going to just let the body be a crappy body because you said, oh, well, I've got the head right and I don't really want to mess up this drawing and change it. Because sometimes the head and the body are just not agreeing with each other, much like with your actual hand when you're drawing. Sometimes they're not agreeing with each other. And you got to just say, screw it. I need to come back and change that. So I try to do all the changes I'm going to do to the head, to the body first, and I'll indicate the head. For instance, right here, it's very much tucked into his chest, back of his head. It's different than I had it in the gesture. It's a little bit more like that. It's not as much laid back as I'd drawn it. Then getting the other shoulder up here, which is the pec is going up into the shoulder, and that arm going forward. These arms are kind of parallel, but also converging towards each other. And that rounding of the forearm, the far forearm. So if I put in some construction lines just to some cross axis to give you a sense of the volume, there. See, they're mostly parallel, but they're converging to where the hands are coming together. Sort of drew through the torso there, and that torso line is making it a little bit confusing in terms of the arm. So I erased a little bit of that out. But here's his shoulder. So these lines that I'm drawing on here are not on the figure. I'm drawing lines to just sort of indicate the direction these forms are going. I'm circumnavigating it, drawing around it. And the interesting thing is you can use the anatomy of the figure, the ribs, the muscles, and you can use those and have them coincide with these cross-axis lines. And that's how you're really using the anatomy to describe the form, having it help you describe the form. So there's a lot more going on in this thigh that I could really get into, but the timer's already done. It's a pretty long video. And I gotta tell you, it's a little lonely doing this without having you guys commenting in the live stream. So hopefully this will go up and come out looking good. And you guys can leave me comments here that I can address in future videos or give you guys feedback and come back and talk to. But in the meantime,
thanks for watching. This video was brought to you by my subscribers on patreon.com. If you'd like to join them, go to patreon.com/GERIMI. For as little as $2 a month, you'll receive a bonus monthly video and a ton of behind-the-scenes artwork and blog posts. To read pages of my comics for free and keep up with what I'm creating, sign up for my monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And to buy physical copies of my comics or read digitally on Amazon Kindle, go to amazon.jeremy.net. That will forward you to my Amazon author page. That's it for now. Go be creative.